Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's October 21st, 2022 program, the 4-day, 32-hour work week. Can it work? This is the 7th program of our 2022-2023 programming year. My name is Karen Knutson, and I am City Club's president. Welcome to everyone here with us in downtown Eugene and to our live stream and listening audiences. It is wonderful to see you and to have you with us today. For almost 30 years, the City Club of Eugene has been delivering our mission to build community vision through open inquiry by coordinating weekly programs and the discussion of topical, engaging, important community issues. City Club creates the space for civil discussion of civic issues, and today we welcome a national thought leader in economics and sociology, Juliet Schor, to help us think a little harder about the typical American work week. Is the 40-hour week a necessary underpinning of American life? Or could we do more and do better by working a little bit less? Support for the City Club of Eugene is provided by our members and both business and in-kind sponsors. Our diamond sponsors are Kaiser Permanente, the University of Oregon, Peace Health, and Lane Community College, and we appreciate the support of Lane County and the City of Eugene. You too can help to support City Club's mission and weekly programming by becoming a member at our website, cityclubofelugene.org. We invite you to join us for City Club's programs in downtown Eugene or via live stream on YouTube, and we encourage you to ask questions of our speaker today, live at the mic here in downtown Eugene, by email or via live chat. And we'll have time for that Q&A after we hear from our speaker. I'd like to thank Joel Corin for coordinating today's program, and now he'll come to the microphone to introduce our program and speaker, Juliet Schor.
Imagine a 3-day weekend every week. The normal, usual work week is a 40-hour week. As Dolly Parton sang, from 9 to 5. Sometime in the past, there was a push to have a 4-day, 10-hour work week, giving people a 3-day weekend every week. It didn't catch on. Now, there's a new proposal by Juliet Schor, our speaker, to have a 4-day, 32-hour work week with the same salary and benefits as the 5-day, 40-hour week. Many experiments are going on around the world, which she is monitoring to determine the success or failure of this proposal. Will it work? Will it work for all industries? Will it work for all size companies or businesses? We'll hear about the results of the experiments that are going on right now. Juliet Schor is the Wayne Morse Chair for 2021 to 2023. She is an economist and sociologist at Boston College. Her research focuses on work, consumption, climate change. Her most recent book, After the Gig, How the Sharing Economy Got Hijacked and How to Win It Back. She just gave a lecture on the gig economy as part of her duties as the Wayne Morse Chair. She won a Porchlight Management and Workplace Culture Book of the Year Award. Schor is co-founder of the Center for New American Dream, the South End Press, and the Center for Popular Economics. She earned a BA at Wesleyan University, a PhD in economics at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. She is, to my knowledge, the third Wayne Morse Chair who has graced our stage here at City Club. Established in 1981, the Wayne Morse Chair of Law and Politics honors Wayne Morse, the U.S. Senator and former Dean of the UO School of Law. Occupants of the Wayne Morse Chair exemplify the characteristics of Wayne Morse: integrity, independence, respect for the rule of law, and civil liberties. Occupants of the Wayne Morse Chair have included prominent public intellectuals, activists, scholars, policymakers, and writers. During their residence at the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics, they have delivered major public addresses, taught classes, engaged in wide-ranging conversations with audiences in the university and at City Club. Juliet, welcome to City Club.
Great. Well, thank you so much, both of you and everyone, for such a warm welcome. And hello to folks on the live stream and the radio. It's really a privilege to be able to address you today. I'm going to talk about the 4-day week, and I'm going to give you, a lot of data about why this is something that's important to do, why it's gaining momentum, and why I think it can work. But I realized before starting that I could probably start with a piece of information that might convince you more than anything else. And that is that we've had a 40-hour standard work week encoded into legislation for almost 100 years. And if a whole century without progress on reducing work time is not enough to convince us that maybe the time has come for some change, well, I'm not sure what will be. So let me start with a little bit of information about what's going on in the workforce, both around the world and also specifically in the United States, because this is a big part of why more and more businesses are starting to join the 4-day week revolution, if we want to call it that. And it's an interesting thing about the movement that's going on today that I'm part of. It is very much employer-led, which puts it in a contrast to the earlier history of work time reduction, which was much more led by labor unions and workers. Of course, workers are also important in what's happening today, and here we can see a bit why. The first point is that according to the Gallup polling organization, which does an annual report of the state of the workforce around the world, what they're finding is that stress has reached an all-time high, particularly since the pandemic. This is not a surprise. The pandemic is a key factor in why there's in developments in the labor force today, both globally and in the US. I sometimes say that the pandemic has turbocharged the 4-day week movement. So in 2021, the last year we have data for right now, Gallup asked the following question: did you experience the following feelings during a lot of the day yesterday? And the first one is about stress, and they found that 44 people answered that question yes. So that means just yesterday, which people can remember pretty well, a lot of the day they were stressed out. And that's up from 38% in 2019. A slightly lower percentage felt worry, and somewhere in the low 20% experienced sadness and anger. So there's a lot of strong emotions out there in the global labor force, and increasingly in the US labor force. So the US and Canadian levels of stress are much higher than globally. 57% of US and Canadian workers reported feeling that daily stress, up by 8 percentage points. So people are stressed and they're burned out. The American Psychological Association, in their last workforce survey, found that 78% of employees had experienced work-related stress in the month before the survey. So the Gallup is just one day before. 60% reported negative impacts of work-related stress, lack of interest, motivation, and energy, over a quarter. And that's those feelings of burnout. Lack of effort at work, 19%. More than a third reported cognitive weariness, and 44% reported physical fatigue as a result of their work. And that's an almost 40% increase since 2019. All this stress, burnout, lack of motivation, fatigue results in lower productivity, accidents, absenteeism, higher healthcare costs, resignations. These are some of the trends that are leading employers to start to think more creatively about scheduling their employees. One of the pieces of data that scholars have begun to turn to in recent years is to look at what people are looking for on the internet as a way of trying to get a sense of how they're feeling. And in the United States, Google searching tools allow us to figure out how many people are searching on the term burnout from work. In 2018, just a little bit over 20% of the, In 2018, searching for burnout from work was not that high. 100% peak interest in 2022, and it turns out to be almost 4 times the amount of searching that people were doing in 2018. And it's 100% more than where they were at in the 2000s, in the first decade of the 2000s. So those numbers started going up in 2016, so a little bit before the pandemic. And this movement actually started pre-pandemic, but it was sort of just bumping along without too much energy or momentum. And then with the pandemic, interest and activity shot up just the way searches for burnout from work did. You may have heard of the Great Resignation, record numbers of Americans quitting their jobs. In 2001, there was a monthly quitting rate of 4.5 million people. Monthly, not yearly. That is so far out of US experience. And it's not all people quitting and resigning because they're just burned out from work, although there's some of that. It's also people moving to different jobs because they're dissatisfied with the job that they have, both some people going for higher pay, for sure, especially in the lower paid occupations. But the other thing that started happening was employees began to sort of feel more entitlement to having decent treatment at work. And so the mistreatment that many workers were experiencing at work became too much for them because the pandemic led people to question how they were living their lives, to realize that life can be very short. They see people disappearing all around them and say, wait a second, I only have one life and I want to live it in a good way. So the Great Resignation, or what some have called the Great Reshuffle. There's also something called quiet quitting, which is people staying on the job but sort of doing the minimum. Gallup now says 50% of US employees are quiet quitters, and they've got also back up to really high levels. Almost 20% of employees are what they call actively disengaged, so people who really are not into it in terms of their jobs. And levels of engagement have also fallen during the pandemic. So the question that many employers are asking, and some of you may be asking yourselves if you are an employee or an employer, is could a 4-day week help to alleviate some of these problems? And before I give the answer to that, and you won't be surprised that my answer is yes, I want to step back a minute to just give you a little bit of history on working hours to see why in the US in particular, we suffer from, and I will use that term, we suffer from long hours of work in a sort of internationally unusual way. It didn't always used to be like this, but I think that's part of why we're seeing such strong trends in the US around quitting and stress and burnout and quiet quitting and so forth. So the first point is that from in the period from about 1870 to 1970, all the early industrializing countries of the world experienced really large declines in working hours. So in 1870, the sort of consensus estimate of how much people worked on average in a year was about 3,000 hours. That's a 60-hour work week on a 50-week year. So very long hours of work. This was before we had weekends. It was before there was a Sunday off or before a Saturday off. And all France, Germany, Japan, Netherlands, UK, US, and also smaller countries all had very substantial declines in work time beginning in 1870, and that continued for all of these countries. Some of them kept on a much stronger trajectory of declining hours of work. And in the post-World War II period, the US began to diverge from the rest of these countries after the Second World War. So we did continue to have declines, but we went to a slightly less steep rate of decline. And in the 1970s, that's where we really started to diverge. And that divergence in many ways was the impetus for the first book I wrote, which is called The Overworked American, The Unexpected Decline of Leisure, because it was expected that we would keep on a trajectory of shorter and shorter hours. One little point I want to make here is that shorter hours came courtesy of productivity growth, and that's typically the way it happens. And we have typically in capitalist economies, you have pretty robust productivity growth, more at some times, less at others, but that's what sort of funds work time reduction. It allows us to produce the same amount in fewer hours of work. Okay, after 1973, some things start to change, in particular in the United States, as I've mentioned, and the US sort of begins to flatline on working hours. And so big gaps open up between US and particularly Western European workers in the area of 300 to 400 hours a week. French workers, German workers, Dutch workers working that much less. So you can think about it in terms of weeks of work, sort of whole months and months difference in terms of how much people work. And of course, we know Europeans have those very long summer holidays. They get, minimum of a month, but others get more. I lived in the Netherlands in the mid-90s, and their hours were already quite low by then. Many people on 4-day weeks, all new employees for government jobs, including teachers, were hired at 4 days. At that time, it was part of their strategy for avoiding unemployment. And as a university professor, I think I had something like 12 or 15 weeks of vacation if I wanted to take it. Of course, most of us didn't. The other nice thing was, this is just a little anecdote, they reserved a bit of our pay, and I remember when May came along, I got twice as much pay in my bank account as I did in other months, and I asked one of my colleagues, well, what happened? I got so much money this month. He said, oh, that's your vacation pay, so you can afford to go off and do something fun in the summer. Okay, we can only wish here in the US. So the 4-day week is the shape that pressure for work time reduction has taken in recent months, and I would say over the last year or two. There's been a fair amount of work time reduction experimentation in Nordic countries, and I'll say more about that, but most of it hasn't been 4-day weeks. So the research that we're doing and the trials that we are running are really the first large-scale trials of 4-day weeks that have been done in human history, I guess. We call the 4-day week a triple dividend reform, meaning we expect benefits in 3 ways. One is social well-being, improvements in people's well-being, people having more time for family and community, better and more sleep, just overall, people thrive more, and society thrives when we have a reduction to a 4-day week. But there are also economic benefits. Companies which are doing this are finding that hourly productivity rises, that their organizational performance is positively affected, that they are better able to recruit and retain labor. So in contrast to the way people used to think about this, which was there'd be an economic price to pay, but maybe the social benefits are enough, we're seeing economic benefits as well. And then finally, there are benefits for the climate. As you know, we're in a climate crisis. We have to urgently address the fact that our climate is being destabilized by the day. And one of the ways we can do this is by moving to a 4-day week. It both reduces commuting emissions, and there's a fair amount of evidence about that, but also longer term, the research that I've done over many years shows that countries which have shorter annual hours of work, on average, have lower carbon emissions. And that's because they're taking more productivity in the form of shorter hours of work rather than just producing and producing more. The more we produce, the more carbon we emit. Okay, the Icelanders between 2015 and 2019 did some large-scale trials of a reduced working week down to 35, 36 hours, no reduction in pay. Over 2,500 workers were involved in this, and they saw no reductions in productivity and service provision. Those either remained the same or went up. Big improvements in well-being for employees across a wide range of indicators, and I'm going to talk to you in a minute about some of the specific indicators that we are looking at, which are the same as what the Icelanders looked at. And now, because these trials were so successful, they were with government workers, the original trials, 86% of the Icelandic workforce now is either on one of these reduced schedules or eligible if they want to go on one. And next week, I'm speaking to a big group of one of the biggest trade unions in Iceland about the new push to get all the way down to 32 hours. Research from Norway, Sweden, Finland, et cetera, also supports the idea that work time reduction has tremendous benefits for people on their quality of life, on the quality of their work, their life satisfaction, sleep, stress, and so forth. All right, so how can this happen? And in particular, how do you get those economic benefits? That seems hard. The social benefits seem kind of obvious. The climate benefits are common sense. But now you're telling me, you may be thinking, I'm an employer, you're asking me to give my employees 5 days worth of pay, so no pay reduction, but they've only got to come to work for 4 days. How can that possibly work? So one of the ways it can work is by what's called the 100-80-100 model. Workers get 100% of their pay. They only work 80% of the time, but they are expected to maintain 100% of their productivity. And this is the model developed by Andrew Barnes, who is an entrepreneur in New Zealand who founded the 4-day-week global network that I am working with and that is recruiting companies around the world to take part in trials. In his own company, he found that job performance was maintained, revenue increased tremendously, and in a way that was really what he cared most about, that his company was thriving and growing. Staff stress levels were lowered, and work-life balance improved significantly. And this is the name of his company is Perpetual Guardian, and you can Google it. There's a lot of information about their trial, and it was one of the, it's been one of the most widely cited trials because he had research going all the way along, which wasn't too common until we started doing our research. So we are taking this idea and this model global. We have trials of companies and nonprofits as well who are piloting 4-day weeks around the world. We started our first trial in February of 2022. The 6th trial is beginning in February of 2023. We have hundreds of companies involved, big and small, not the very, very biggest, but we have 1,000-person companies. We have thousands of workers who are participating or have participating in these trials. They go for 6 months, and so our first 2 trials have ended. Before the trial starts, we do 2 months of workshops, coaching, and peer support so that people actually go into the trial with a plan for how they are going to maintain that productivity. What they used to do in 5 days, they can still do in 4. They figure out how to reorganize work. My team is collecting data from the companies and also surveying employees before the trial, midpoint of the trial, when the trial ends, and then 6 months from now, we'll be doing our first sort of year later surveys to see if these results hold. We're getting lots of media about it. This risk takers, CNN has an annual list of risk takers in business, the big ideas that people are putting forward every year. There are 12 of them, and the 4-day week was the very first one that they released this year. And they think it's a really important change. So, what have we found? These results are embargoed from the press, so I'm going to tell you about them, but you won't hear about them in the press until the end of next month. We're going to be releasing them because we're still putting together the results from the second trial, which we just finished collecting the data for. But these are from the first trial. And what we found was really fantastic. First thing is people's self-reports of productivity went up. So we asked them at the beginning of the trial, how productive do you think you are compared to your lifetime, peak levels? And that went up significantly. And by significantly, I mean statistically significantly. So this is not just a random change that we're attributing to the 4-day week. People in pre-trial thought they were at about 70% of their peak ability, and now they're just under 80%. People got more control over their schedules, which is interesting because even though they have to combine things into just the 4 days, they felt they had more control over their schedules. A really important thing that did not change, and we're very happy about that, is work intensity. So this is not just a program of speed up. We know we could always just work faster, harder, in a shorter period of time to get things done, but that's not sustainable. That's not what happened. They did reorganize work to get rid of the inefficient and low productivity activities, and that's really the key to the 100-80-100 model. And the complexity of the work that people did also was maintained. Hours of work went down. In the first trial, they only fell by about 5 hours a week because there was a whole big unit in one of the companies that only later we learned wasn't participating. Those were people paid on commission, so that's a little bit of a complexity you have to deal with if you're interested in doing this. But another really good thing that happened was that people didn't take on second jobs in that day off, and that was something that I worried about because that will undermine a lot of the good results. Actually second job holding fell, although not statistically significantly so. The companies are really happy about the trials. We asked them on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the most positive. How do you feel about it? In the first trial, the average score was 9.1, and actually most of them were higher than that. There was one company that didn't have as good an experience. Productivity, they said, was 7.7. Performance, 7.7. So all of these were very positively affected. Not one company is planning not to continue. 77 said they're definitely continuing, and the remainder of them are planning, but they've got to go to their boards or they haven't finalized the decision yet. We have similar results from a very big trial in the UK. 70 companies signed up for that trial. It's by far the biggest that we've done. And the company results, midpoint, are very similar to these final results. And what about workers' well-being, employees' well-being? Well, their burnout went down significantly. Their work stress went down. Their anxiety levels went down. Mental health went up. What's called positive affect, so how they feel, that got better. Their negative affect went down. Their life satisfaction went up. Their work-family balance, their sense of balance in work-family went up. So on all of these well-being measures, much improvement. The one thing we didn't see was an increase in job satisfaction, and we think that's because when we surveyed them at the beginning of the trial, they already knew they were getting the 4-day week, and they already had that bump in job satisfaction. A really important finding of our results is that people are sleeping more. We had 43% of employees in the baseline who are sleep deprived, meaning fewer than 7 hours a week, and that fell to 15%. The fraction with insomnia or other sleep problems fell. The fraction with poor quality sleep fell. So, and we think sleep is really part of why all those other things get better: stress, burnout, physical, mental health. So before, I'm going to wrap up in a few minutes for questions. So let me just address the question that you may be wondering about, which is, well, how is it possible to be more productive in 4 days than 5? You're saying this is what companies are doing, but is that realistic? And is it realistic for all companies? These are the kinds of strategies that companies are using. They're changing meetings culture. They're reducing distractions. They're changing communication style. People are spending less time in the workplace goofing off. And I don't have data on this, but I do want to say when we talk to workers, for employees in workplaces where they have a lot of control over their work and they're sitting in front of a computer, some of the time they're on Facebook, or they're playing Angry Birds or whatever a video game is, or they're shopping, or they're just, wordling or doing something. People need on-the-job leisure time. I don't say that people are doing this, that it's a bad thing. We just can't, we can't be continuously at a high level of productivity. We need to take a little bit of time off during the day, but people are doing less of that. And another really important thing is, for more privileged workers in our economy, they have the ability to take time off work and go to a doctor's appointment or take a child to the doctor or do a personal errand. There are many of those kinds of daily life needs that are only possible to do on that 9-to-5 schedule, and so people have to leave work to do them. And a big chunk of savings comes from the fact that now people can do those on Fridays or whatever their day off is, and so it's not cutting into their work time. So meetings are the biggest thing that changes. There's a lot of growing evidence about how unproductive the meeting culture has become in many American companies. And it's not in all. The companies who are participating in our trials, although there are many kinds of industries there. We have healthcare industries, we have a restaurant chain. Most of them are white collar, and most of them are the kinds of workplaces where people go to a lot of meetings. So a recent study found that the average employee spends 18 hours per week in 17.7 meetings. I mean, it's just an inordinate amount of meeting time. Professionals spend about a third of their work time in meetings. And most, nearly half of employees feel they have too many unnecessary meetings on their calendar. And mostly they just accept these meetings because they don't feel freedom to decline. There's an interesting survey that's found 7% of people just ignore the meeting invitations. And if you're one of the people in the workplace who feels like you can ignore them, well, kudos to you. But the vast majority of people don't feel they can ignore a meeting that they've been invited to. What the companies do is they change their meeting cultures in multiple ways. So fewer people get invited to meetings, there are fewer meetings, and they make the meetings much more efficient. And part of that is that some of the companies go to a really rigid system in which meetings can only take a certain amount of time. Microsoft Japan got a 40% increase in productivity they did an experiment for 1 month that was during the Olympics when they were worried people couldn't drive into town, and so they gave them 1 day off a week. But they also drastically changed their meeting culture, and I don't remember exactly the number of minutes that they allowed meetings to be. It was very, very short, like no meetings more than 15 or 20 minutes, and they got this huge burst in productivity. So change your meeting culture. That's the first thing people do. The other thing they do is they deal with distractions. There's a lot of lost productivity in the workplace because people are distracted all the time. So one of the companies in our UK trial put in what's called a traffic light system. everybody, they have an open plan, mostly Office. Everyone has a little light on their computer, and it can be green, which says, sure, if you want to talk to me, feel free. It can be yellow. It's like, you can come talk to me, but you better have a very good reason for it. And it can be red, which says, do not dare approach me, I am busy doing something. And by eliminating that source of distractions, they're able to get a lot more productivity out of people. And there are plenty of other kinds of distractions that companies are also dealing with. This company, which happens to be a public relations agency, also now rigorously keeps all client meetings to just 30 minutes and doesn't let them just drag on as long as they can. One of the things we know is that shorter hours are associated with higher per hour productivity. Norway and Denmark, for instance, are countries in Europe with extraordinarily high productivity. They're also among the lowest hour countries in Europe. The United States used to have the highest productivity in the world. It no longer does, and my view is that a big part of that is that our hours are too long. And then you can see countries which have longer hours of work tend to have lower per hour productivity. And this is what we're seeing in our trials. By shortening the hours of work, each hour becomes more productive. Now, there is a bit of a paradox here. What I've said so far is that the 100-80-100 model can succeed. And I would say that's because these are workplaces, we could call them low-intensity workplaces, or they're workplaces that have a fair amount of unproductive or low productivity time or slack that can be sort of reorganized out of the system. But there are many other workplaces where you can't do that. So I'm not standing here and telling you that every company can do the 100-80-100. I don't believe that's true. What about healthcare, where people are working at a really intense pace, and so much so that we're seeing so many of them burn out and leave the field? Or flight attendants or teachers, again, another burnout profession where people are leaving. Those workplaces can also shift to a 4-day week where they're still paying 5 days of pay because people need that 5 days, especially in some of the lower paid occupations like teaching. But they're at a 180-80 model, and that is, do not increase the intensity of work for them. Hire new people for that 5th day. And you may think, well, how could that work? And the answer is that those kinds of workforces those employers are losing a lot of money through that attrition, and they are spending a lot of money to hire and train people, and then they're going out, or they're sitting with empty positions, and we're hearing more and more of this from employers. And so the economics of it can actually work out. They're going to pay less in healthcare costs. They're going to pay less in unemployment for people who leave. And there is some evidence of from nurses studies in Scandinavia where they found that putting nurses on a 6-hour day and hiring some additional staff cost just a little bit more than the original schedule. The nurses were all better off, and the patient outcomes were a lot better off. And if you would actually cost in those patient outcomes and put a dollar value on those may have turned out to be financially less costly way to do things than the 5-day intense week. So it's a kind of paradox right now that the low-intensity workplaces and the high-intensity workplaces may actually have the 4-day week as a common solution, but for very different reasons. The reasons that the costs of recruiting, retaining, retraining employees have gotten very high. The 4-day work week is a major competitive advantage to employers right now in the labor force. Not all these companies are doing it in the same way. You may be thinking, oh, how could you do this if you're a customer-facing business that has a 7-day availability? Well, those companies do rotations. The companies that can shut down for 1 day a week are often doing it. Friday's the most common day. There are companies who are giving workers the choice to work any 4 days they want or in any configuration. One of the biggest companies in our trial does a Flex 4 system where people can pick out of, if you think about each day has 2 blocks and there are 5 of them, so there are 10 blocks and they just have to pick 8 of them to work. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and some of the companies are actually even making some changes as the trials go on. We have some interviews and comments that people are putting in our surveys, but people are just saying it's been fantastic. One employee says, I'm 50 years old, I've worked full-time my whole life. For years, I have dreamt about one day being able to reduce my working week, but due to financial commitments, I've been unable to. This has just, been fantastic. And overall, the 4-day week is amazing, and I would never switch back. For some companies, there are some challenges. But for the most part, people really enjoy it. We're also charting what they're doing on their off day. And one of the nice things is, in addition to sleeping more, which we found, we also see people getting engaged in hobbies and leisure activities that they weren't able to do when they were working 5 days. So let me stop there. Thank you for listening, and I would love to take your questions.
We'll now take a 5-minute break for the folks at the tables to get their questions together. In keeping with today's theme, we'd like you to finish your questions in 4 minutes.
One group had every other Monday off. The second group had every other Friday off. The third group had the alternate Monday off. The fourth group had the alternate Friday off. The employees were getting 5% cut in pay, but they had every other weekend as a 3-day weekend, and that was a good trade-off. It failed finally after the county got more money because the managers said, oh, we want all of the department employees to be available Monday morning for the full department staff meetings. And now that we can afford it, we want everybody back.
Yeah, well, I can respond to it. It's a great example of, in part, the dysfunctionality of the meeting culture, but it's a much better way to deal with shortfalls in demand or in revenue. And what's interesting is that we have the ability in many states in this country to give workers unemployment insurance for that little bit of work that they're losing. about maybe close to half the states have this, and yet so few companies take this up in a recession, and they typically put all the burden of the downturn on a small group of people, very much in contrast to Europe, where they do this work sharing. And there's a lot of good evidence about work sharing. And by being able to retain workers, it's a great system. And I'm just really sorry that they didn't keep it up for you here.
We have a number of people in line, so hopefully we can keep the question short and the answer short.
Hi, I'm Margaret Halleck. I'm a City Club member, and I'm so happy to hear about your research. I think this is really going to be a game changer in the desires for many of us to have a shorter work week. So we have two questions from our table. One is, since the trials have been during or post-pandemic, how has it interacted with remote or hybrid work where people are working here and there? And secondly, did your experiments include hourly workers? And if so, how was that managed?
Yeah, thanks. Those are great questions. Many of our companies are partially and some are fully remote, but not all of them. We also have restaurants and healthcare organizations. We have a little bit of manufacturing in the trials. I think the remote piece is best summed up by the CEO of HealthWise, the first company in our trials, who said, remote work taught us that we can trust our employees for where they work, and now we're going to trust them for how much they work. And they've had a phenomenal experience with the 4-day week. And your second question... Hourly, yes, there are hourly workers in these trials, so they go to fewer hours and they have a higher hourly pay, so they're all included. And even with the part-timers, what's happened with a lot of the part-timers who are on, and what we recommend companies do, they may have people who are on 4-day schedules earning 80%, and they get topped up to 100%, and they stay on those 4-day schedules.
Thank you, Karin Knutson, City Club President. And I have a question for you that is a combination of two questions from our live stream, a question from Jesse Rice and a question from Todd Boyle. Both of them have to do with overworking. And the question is, in some industries, like construction, the 4-day 10-hour day, 40-hour work week is already common, but then workers usually take on work on day 5 and day 6 to earn overtime pay. Todd's question had to do with what about the quote-unquote notorious sweatshops in professional firms, law, accounting, consultancies, where the expectation is that people are working 60, 80 hours a week. Can you say a little bit about how your research is illuminating the different reasons why people are working too much?
Yeah, thank you. So with the first one, I think it's important to recognize no change, no innovation or policy change is a magic bullet that can solve all problems. So this will not solve the problem of inadequate wages, although it will contribute to some positive effects there because it should help to push wages up. But if we have occupations where people do not earn enough in for a reasonable work week to support their families or do what they need to do, then we've got to raise those wages. We've got to do something about that. And I think that increasingly people understand that the problem of low wages in this country is very much connected to economic inequality of wealth and income, because since the 1970s, the vast majority of productivity growth has gone to people at the top, and people of earning lower wages have had wage stagnation. And that's one of the big reasons that they've had to add on those hours. So just reducing hours won't solve that problem. And the second one, I don't have detailed information from companies yet in terms of knowing how those really long hour companies solved or have fared during the trial. We do have law firms and banks and accountant companies and many of the notoriously long hour kinds of industries in our sample. I would say the one I know the most about is the restaurant chain whose managers started out at 55 hours a week. That was their standard week when the trial began. So they moved them down into the mid-40s. So they couldn't get them all the way down at once to 32. And the second phase of the trial, they're going to bring the wait staff down. So it may just be a more gradual reduction that you have to do in some of those really long hour firms.
Hi, my name is Andrew Kallick. I'm the president-elect of City Club. I'm able to be here on a Friday at noon, not because I have a 4-day week, but because I have a very flexible workspace. And I saw some of your testimonials say I liked choosing 3 days and 2 half-days and other things like that. And so my question for you is it more important for all the benefits you describe for people to work less, or is it more important for them to work in a way that is flexible to their life, or is it a combination of both in your view? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that what we've seen with now some decades of flexible work schedules is that they are valuable to people, and particularly people who have very sort of rigid other commitments, whether it's picking up a child from school or other kinds of care commitments and so forth, or maybe going to school themselves. But I think that the kinds of effects that we're seeing so far, and it's still early days, so I'm going to qualify this with that we're seeing so far with the work time reductions are sort of more profound than what you see with the just allowing people a bit more control over their schedules. And one of the things I've noticed, I mean, when I wrote The Overworked American in 1992, we already had companies who were giving, in that day, it was called flex time. And it was okay, but it really wasn't a game changer. And the 4-day week is a game changer. It's just, it seems to be having a much more profound impact on people's well-being and on the companies.
Hi, I'm Mary Layton, City Club member, and I heard you talking about this topic before we started the program, but my question is about education. So that was my career, and what I remember is you couldn't hand your kids over on the 5th day to some strange person because they wouldn't get that so-and-so had a bad day yesterday and now maybe it was time for a good day, or like the whole issue of continuity, especially with little kids, is really important. And unless the whole world goes to the same 4-day work week, then the issue of providing stable coverage for the time, in the institutions we're used to having stable coverage becomes important. How have you been dealing with that issue so far?
So we don't have educational institutions yet in our trials. I do know that in the United States, that there, particularly in the South, teacher shortages are leading schools to go to 4-day school weeks. And the difference there, though, is that they're lengthening the school day, which I don't love. I think that a longer day is too much for kids. So I don't know. I think that you probably can get many of the same benefits of sort of higher productivity, i.e. more learning in a shorter number of hours in education than we're seeing in business. But let me just speak from the part of the education system that I know better, which is higher education. I'm a professor. We've already had a sort of long-term subtle shift away from Friday classes. So many students are already just taking classes on Monday through Thursday. Some universities don't even offer many regular classes on Friday. My daughter went to one that didn't have any regular classes on Friday. And I just think that people increasingly are needing those 3 days, 3 contiguous days to recover. One thing I do know is that the expectations that we have put on young people for how much they're going to learn, I know this goes against what some people think right now, but it has really intensified. The level of performance and skills and knowledge of a college graduate today is in the fields that I work in. I'll take economics. It is light years ahead of what people did, when I got into the field. So I think that, we've really ratcheted up the levels of sophistication that we're expecting. Maybe it's time to, do a little bit reduction in the amount of time that they're in the classroom.
Kitty Piercy, City Club President. Thanks so much for the conversation. I'll do this really quick. I can see we're ending the morning here. So I never have this conversation about work without thinking of childcare. And I really think about the lower end wages of childcare providers, parents trying to go to work, having their kids taken care of. How are you looking at this whole perspective? 'Cause I think those things come together. It's an opportunity to raise one. It's an opportunity to release the cost for the other and affecting the workplace. So anything that you all have done about that, I'd be really interested in.
Yeah, so, if the kids are still in school for that 5th day, it gives parents a way to get some of the things done that they need to do without their children. Some of the people we've interviewed tell us it's really nice because with some children, they're able to spend more time with them, and that's a big desire on the part of many American parents. If we had child care centers going to a 4-day week, they're in that burnout, high-intensity group that I was talking about. We'd have to hire more child care workers. That should also improve their wages. So yes, and that's we need to deal with child care in a better way. And notice that many of as you well know, I'm sure, many of the European countries that are low-hours countries also have much more functional and higher quality child care systems than we do. I'm thinking about France, et cetera. Thank you.
That's all the time we have for questions. Karen?
Thank you so much. This has been our October 21st, 2022 City Club of Eugene, the 4-day, 32-hour work week. Can it work? Before we thank our speaker one last time today, and what a wonderful conversation, so many interesting things to still be thinking about. I would like to recognize City Club's Diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities that we serve. For more information, visit www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians to question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. And you can find more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare provider for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy, and you can learn more at peacehealth.org. And Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. And thank you to Lane County and the City of Eugene for their support. I'd also like to thank today's Sapphire sponsor, AARP Oregon. AARP is dedicated to empowering people aged 50+ and keeping Oregonians informed, engaged, and active. And you can learn more about AARP Oregon's work locally at states.aarp.org/Oregon. Thank you to today's gold sponsors, Ferguson and Fife Dentistry and Hummingbird Wholesale, and to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Pack Info and Simplified Computing LLC, and Dotson's Photography. And of course, a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC FM 89.7, for airing City Club programs on Monday nights at 7 p.m. You can find all recent City Club programs archived on KLCC, as well as our YouTube channel and as podcasts. Next week, on Thursday, October 27th, City Club's program will combine economics, coastal recreation, and renewable energy, wind, waves, and the future of energy on the Oregon coast. We'll hear from a range of experts in the nonprofit, private, and public sectors on the future of energy on Oregon's coast, as well as the costs and benefits of a proposed wave energy project that is planned for off the coast of Coos Bay and Brookings. Then, on November 4th, a program about literacy in Oregon, its challenges and solutions. Even before the coronavirus pandemic, Oregon students were struggling to read, with less than 1/2 of students reading proficiently by 3rd grade. On November 4th, City Club will welcome 3 experts who will outline the challenges and potential solutions to Oregon's literacy crisis. If you have a question about either of these upcoming programs, send us an email at info@cityclubofueugene.org. And if you have a suggestion for a topic or a future City Club program, please visit our website at cityclubofuegene.org. We welcome everyone to join this conversation. It has been our pleasure to welcome you to City Club today, and thank you again to today's speaker, Juliet Schor, the UO Wayne Morse Chair. It's been a pleasure to see you all. Thank you for joining us at the City Club, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.